Hi, everybody, and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles, and on this episode, we're going to do a top 10. The topic of the top 10 worst repackagings. And this is coming off of the Walter renamed to Gunther. So I went back and I decided to go back and see what I think are the top 10 times a person's been repackaged, the worst times where it hasn't worked out. Now, some of these are because they changed companies, changed gimmicks. Some of these, or they stayed in the same company, had a change of gimmick or an evolution of the gimmick. But with all that being said, let's jump right into that. Our number 10, Brutus the Barber Beefcake and his many gimmicks in WCW, the Butcher, the Zodiac, the Booty Man, and the Disciple. That's a lot. Beefcake famously only got his WCW contract and his WCW roster spot by being Hulk Hogan's best friend. They seem to try anything with him, like the Booty Man was like an early version of Billy Gunn's Mr. Ass character. The Butcher and the Zodiac, the Butcher seemed to be a more serious version of the Brutus the Barber Beefcake, a more violent version. The Zodiac, they tried to go like a crazy face painted route. And the Disciple, they just tried to make him look like he was part of Sons of Anarchy before Sons of Anarchy was a thing. Obviously, you'll see this later when Bischoff does Aces and Eights. He obviously somewhat likes motorcycle gangs. But it was, none of them really connected, and none of them really had the feeling that the original Beefcake did. And, you know, while he wasn't a stalwart, while he wasn't one of the guys that you could say, like, here's a surefire Hall of Famer, he was a pretty major talent in the WWE, WWF at the time, in the years leading up to this. Arguably one of the top 5 baby faces during his run there. And even when he was a heel, he was a tag champion with Greg the Hammer Valentine. So it was a little jarring to see him go through these different roles and none of them actually work. For that reason, he makes this list. Now, our number 9 is another guy that went from WWE over to WCW. And I know a lot of people will put this as their number 1 on their lists, but I'm going to give the guy a break. And I had to put it on here, but I'm going to leave it lower than most people would, and that's Typhoon coming over as the Shockmaster. If you've not seen the Shockmaster video, and I'm pretty sure if you're watching this video, you've seen the Shockmaster video, because if you're watching this video, you're a big enough wrestling fan to have watched some of these horrible things, the Booker T, We're Coming For You Hogan interview, the Shockmaster, Katie Vick, the stuff that's legendarily bad in wrestling. I really kind of felt bad. I don't know that even if that debut went off perfectly, that the Shockmaster would have worked in the time frame that they had it in. We were starting to get away from the comic book characters. We're only a little bit away from ECW becoming a thing, from the NWO becoming a thing, from the Attitude Era. So that character wouldn't have worked even if it was a perfect situation, even if he didn't have the fall. But to me, it's really sad because Typhoon Tugboat, a really good wrestler, someone I really enjoyed. The Natural Disasters, him and Earthquake, were a team that I'm a big fan of, and I think don't get the quite the recognition they deserve. I think they were really awesome together. I think he was an awesome wrestler himself. And I did get a chance, the funny sidebar, the last wrestling show I went to was actually pre-lockdown, pre-pandemic. There was an independent show where the main attraction of the show was getting to meet the Shockmaster, meeting Fred Ottman, Typhoon, Tugboat. And I got to meet the guy, and I had the chance to, he had different, pictures of his different gimmicks, and I had already had a Typhoon autograph that I got through a Pro Wrestling Crate, So I had to go with the Shockmaster autograph just because I hadn't had one yet. And I even said it to him, and he couldn't have been a nicer guy. He's like, look, I'm a really big fan of your work. I already have a Typhoon autograph. Would you mind signing the Shockmaster? Which, of course, he didn't. He's in on it at this point. He's in on the memes. So, again, for that and for the fact that everybody's dunked on him for the last 20 years, I'm going to leave this down lower on the list than where it should probably be. But that's the reasoning why. Because he was a nice man, and come on, we gotta give him a little bit of a break. Now, our number 8. Albert / Giant Bernard coming back to WWE as Lord Tensai. You knew that this was a fail right away when he debuted and the crowds were chanting Albert, because it wasn't that long before that he had a successful run, Tag Team Champion, Intercontinental Champion, as Albert. And then he went on to New Japan Pro Wrestling, became Giant Bernard, was even more successful there, figured that he would come back to the WWE as a conquering hero, well, not necessarily a hero, but a conquering star that had built on it, kind of like Drew McIntyre did years later. You would figure he would come back and they would make him someone that could be a credible character, a credible heel for John Cena to go against. It was not to be. They gave him what would be a stereotypical character if he was an actual Japanese descent. But even without that, he had the stereotypical face paint, the garb. It was just not a good character. You could have just let him come back as Albert, let him be what he was as Giant Bernard, but named Albert, and I think he could have ran with it and furthered his career, gave John Cena a credible contender. Again, he is a former champion in your company. You have the credibility already built in. There was no need to repackage him, no need to make him something different, but they decided they did, and it fell flat on its face. Now, coming off of that, our number 7. Another instance of WWE taking what should be, and I'm not dunking on WWE, it's just that they have the longest history at this point of any major national major national wrestling show. That was hard to say. I'm not trying to dunk on WWE, but you're going to see a lot of these are WWE just because of the sheer time that they've had on television. You had a surefire tag team in the Ascension in NXT, to the fact that I was telling friends at the time NXT wasn't what it would become. It wasn't something that you watched. Everybody watched on the network. Some people watched it, not a lot of people. It didn't have the following it would go on to have, and it definitely wasn't on USA cable yet. But the Ascension were a team where I thought you had a can't-miss team. An Acolytes for this generation. A Road Warriors for this generation. An ass-kicking, badass tag team for this generation. Problem is, somebody seen that and decided, instead of them just being a spiritual carry-on of what the Road Warriors did, of what the Acolytes did, of what teams like the Dudley Boys did, they would make them the Road Warriors light. And they painted them up, they put on gear, they had them come out and cut promos talking about how they were better than the Road Warriors and better than Demolition. And it fell flat. And people gave no craps. And the people that didn't know who the Ascension were already did not give a crap about them. And the people that did know were so frustrated by the fact that you took a team that there was nothing wrong with and you changed them to make them crap, basically. And I know that I understand what they were going for. I really do. I just think it was a misplaced idea. You could have left them alone. You could have left them be the new Acolytes, be the new Road Warriors, be that tough, badass tag team without the visual representation of dressing like the Road Warriors. So for that, they basically killed what would have been a promising tag team, which I think today could have been a tag team that was still running in their company, could have been up there with the Usos, with the New Day, up there running as a multiple-time tag team champion, but we didn't get that. Speaking of multiple tag team champions, multiple times, half of the most decorated tag team of all time are number 6, Devon Dudley being repackaged as Reverend Devon. And this is one of those cases where Vince McMahon or whoever made the decision heard what Devon was into in his real life. Devon's a spiritual man. I believe he actually is a reverend. His father was a reverend. I believe his grandfather was a reverend. And they wanted to bring that into his gimmick. Well, for the 5 to 7 years leading up to that, we seen him as half of the Dudley Boys. Inbred clan of half-brothers that just, for whatever reason, the gimmick just worked. And you take him from one of the most popular and successful tag teams of all time, and you change his gimmick, you give him the Deacon Batista, which was our introduction to Dave Batista. Luckily Dave was able to shed that part of his career away and move on to become what he became. And shout out to Dave Batista, he had an amazing career. But this could have totally derailed Devon. I think they went maybe a year before bringing the Dudley Boys back because they realized how wrong it was. And to me, it just never really fit him. It never really fit what they wanted to do with the character. They never could get this off the board. Now, coming from that, our number 5 is Goldust in coming to TNA as Black Rain. Basically, a more evil version of the Goldust character. And I know from reading parts of Dustin Rhodes' book that this is one of the down times of his life, one of the worst periods of his life. He was in the worst shape of his wrestling career. Hell, we're 15 years plus later now, and he's in better shape and a better wrestler now than he was during this time frame. I don't know. It just never, to me, you should have let him be the natural Dustin Rhodes. Because any version of Goldust that wasn't really Goldust, whether it be 7 in WCW or Black Rain here, was never going to work. It was never going to be what Goldust was. Goldust was a revolutionary character. Goldust was something that any other wrestler, it would not have worked. But Dustin Rhodes made it work. And that's why here, this didn't work, because you were giving something that already stretched Dustin Rhodes to his limits. Combine that with the state his life was in, and I'm not knocking the guy. I really ain't. Dustin Rhodes, I love Dustin Rhodes, I love Goldust. But even he has admitted that this was one of the worst parts of his career and one of the worst parts of his life. It just never was going to work, and I don't know why they even tried to do this. You're in a territory or in a company that at that time had ties to the NWA. I don't remember if it had already lost the connection, but the ties were there. You were built off of the backs of the NWA and Jim Crockett and somewhat WCW, and you could have just had him be Dustin Rhodes. He didn't even have to paint his face, but that's what we got. It didn't work. It's on most people's lists of one of the worst gimmicks of all time. It's definitely on the list of worst TNA gimmicks of all time. To me, it was like you got Pepsi or Coke, whatever soda you prefer, Mountain Dew, and then you got your dollar store generic version of it. And then you take the dollar store generic version, take half of it away, pour water in the bottle, and now you got the watered down dollar store generic version, and then you let that sit out and go flat, and then you let that sit out even longer so it goes bad, and that's what you get with Black Rain. Black Rain was a watered down dollar store generic that had gone flat and had gone bad version of Gold Dust. I mean, that's the best way I can explain it, as how bad it was compared to the greatness of the Gold Dust character. I know. It's the best I can do. I'm sorry. Coming off of that, our number 4, a guy that they could have done a lot better with, and it's a guy that I'm not even really a huge fan of. Mike Awesome in WCW, when he was that 70s guy and the Fat Chick Thriller. How do you take a guy who's the size of Mike Awesome, who could wrestle the way he wrestles, who could fly the way he flew, who could do the things the cruiserweights could do, while being as big as the biggest of your heavyweights like Kevin Nash and Scott Hall, and how do you mess that up? How do you make that bad? And it was just terrible. That 70s guy was bad. It was a playoff of that 70s show, which it didn't work. I believe they even bought one of the Partridge Family vans, and if not, they got a van to look exactly like it. You had a guy which you could have built up and you could have made one of your main event guys. Was he the best talker? No, but neither was Sid Vicious, and Sid Vicious could play that role very, very good. Was he one of the best wrestlers? Probably, yeah. Probably one of the best wrestlers they had on the roster at that point. And you crapped on the whole thing. And again, he's a guy I'm not a huge fan of. I never really liked Mike Awesome that much, and I really didn't like when he jumped to WCW because of the way he left. But you could still see it. I mean, anybody that's a wrestling fan, any wrestling booker in history, would have loved to have a guy with the skill set and the size of Mike Awesome in their territory or in their company. And WCW got it, and later WWE didn't do anything with him either, so they're not totally innocent in this. But they just kind of crapped on it, and they kind of made it nothing and made it unimportant. Now, coming from that, another guy who was a legend in ECW, our number 3, Shane Douglas being repackaged as Dean Douglas in WWF. Okay. This one is another no-brainer. You have Shane Douglas, one of the guys that helped make ECW what it was. One of the guys that in the next 2 years when they started going to the Attitude Era, this guy could have really been a catalyst. This was the franchise Shane Douglas character was basically the template for the game Triple H character that they followed, and it was an evolution of the Nature Boy Ric Flair character. So what do you do with him? Oh, he's a school teacher on the side job. Let's make him Dean Douglas. I have no idea. I don't get it. I know Shane Douglas has a reputation of rubbing people the wrong way and burning bridges everywhere he went. But I don't get it. I don't get seeing a talent like Shane Douglas, who in ECW was lighting it on fire and helping to build ECW to where they were on the radar of WWE. WWE knew what ECW was. They knew who they were getting. They could have just kept that character. Again, they decided to make him Dean Douglas for whatever reason. And it just failed miserably. According to him, you'll hear that a lot of the reason he failed is because he got on the bad side of the clique. Again, that's part of it, but I don't know that that gimmick ever would have went over, even if everybody in the company loved him and wanted to work with him every day. I don't think Dean Douglas, in the era that it was given or shown to us, would have been anything more than what it was. A stupid gimmick and a stupid idea from the generation before that they tried pushing on a new generation of fans in the new generation. I don't know. Now, coming from that, we're going to take a serious turn. A lot of these have been goofy. A lot of these have been silly. Our number 2 is straight up racist. And there's no other way around it. And no, I'm not talking about One Man Gang turning to Akeem. That's a different story for a different day. This one might be one of the most racist things that's ever been done in professional wrestling. That's turning Tony Atlas into Saba Simba. If you don't know who Saba Simba is, and just take a look at the picture. When you're done with this video, or pause this video, go look up Saba Simba and come back. Basically, they took a wrestler who was called the Black Superman, Mr. USA, Tony Atlas, who by that point had already carved out a legendary career in professional wrestling, and they made him Saba Simba. And to explain that gimmick, it was basically an African headhunter tribesman that would do a war dance, had the shield. Everything bad about Akeem and Kamala rolled up into one. And it was so bad. And I don't know who greenlighted this. Who looked at this and went, this is a good idea. Let's take a guy that's already a legend that all the wrestling fans in the world know and give him a repackaging that would have been on the minstrel movies. I mean, God, this was bad. And it's probably, if not the most racist thing that WWE or any wrestling company has done, other than flat out, racial stuff that happened way back in the day. This happened in the early 90s. This didn't happen in the 60s. This didn't happen in the 50s. This was the early 90s, and wow, just terrible. And I have nothing I could say to make this, make this something that would have ever flew anywhere at any point. I don't get it. It doesn't make sense to me. Other than the fact that maybe, and just saying this, I'm not trying to defend anybody, you had a bunch of old white guys trying to make gimmicks like they did for the last 20 years and not realizing how tone deaf it was. I don't know. With that being said, before we get into our number 1, we do a thing here on our top 10s called the best of the rest. Basically, it's for the characters or gimmicks that could have made the list or were considered for the list, but for whatever reason just didn't make it. And coming off of that, our first one, Baron Corbin into Happy Corbin. I've gone on record and said that I've been a fan of Baron Corbin's. I think that most of the time he's been given some really crappy things and he's made work. King Corbin, the broke version of Baron Corbin, the Lone Wolf, and he's made them work. The Happy Corbin version of him, I don't know. We might come back to this 3 years from now, and he may have turned that around and made that a great thing, but now, in the middle of it, it's just terrible. It's one of the things that I'm embarrassed to watch when I watch Monday Night Raw or watch SmackDown, or watch WWE at all, it's just embarrassing. It's not good. It's not funny. It's dumb. And for a guy that's taken some pretty bad lumps and turned them into good things, he couldn't polish this turd. And again, we might come back to this video in a year, 2 years, 3 years, and see that Happy Corbin's been a 7-time Universal Champion. Time might prove me wrong, but at the time of this video, it's a very bad gimmick. Not quite bad enough to make the list, but still bad altogether. Now next up on our best of the rest, 2 Cold Scorpio turning into Flash Funk. Now I don't know if it was just the timing was just a little bit off, because we seen just a little bit over a year later, the Godfather would appear in a similar gimmick to what they were doing with Flash Funk. However, he was allowed to be more edgy, where Flash Funk, which, let's be honest, he was supposed to be a pimp. That was the gimmick. The cartoon nature of it kind of held back this character and kind of held back what the gimmick could be, because 2 Cold Scorpio himself, criminally underrated. One of the great wrestlers of the early to mid 2000 or early to mid 90s, and even on into the 2000s. Even now, I've seen him in a couple Game Changer wrestling shows, and he's still pretty dang good for his age. And he had awesome runs in the ECW and WCW. Comes to WWE, they make him Flash Funk, which is, the best way I could describe it is a watered down pimp who was like the original version of the Funkasaurus, which was another gimmick that was terrible. Brutus Clay later on. So I don't get, again, much like I said with most of these, I don't understand why you just didn't leave him as 2 Cold Scorpio. He had already had a name as that. He had already built up a following as that. But who knows? With that being said, before we get into our number 1, if you think I left somebody off the list, if you think I put someone up too high, someone down too low, let me know what you think. Hit me up down here in the comments. Make sure you hit like and share. And finally, our number 1, and you may be asking yourself, George, or asking the video, because you're not George. Unless your name's George too, then hey, you got a cool name. But anyway, you may be asking yourself, or asking me, what could top a racist repackaging that you just said was one of the most racist events in the history of pro wrestling? And I'll let you know. Our number 1, Kazuchika Okada, the Rainmaker in TNA, is Okado. Yes, it did have a little bit of racial overtones. There was that factor to it. But you took Kazuchika Okada, one of the great wrestlers of the last 20 years, and when the history books of wrestling are wrote down and someone goes through the greatest wrestlers of all time, Okada's going to be in that top 10 to 20. You're not going to go too far down the list before you see the name Kazuchika Okada of the greatest of all time. And he was lent out to TNA at a time where TNA and New Japan Pro Wrestling had a working agreement, kind of part of their young boy thing where they send them off on excursion to learn different styles. And TNA repackaged him as a version of what we've seen on the Green Hornet TV show. Kato, I believe was the name. It's been a long time since I've seen the Green Hornet, and I really haven't watched much of it. I've only seen it in passing. I believe that Kato was a character that Bruce Lee played on that. So Okada became Okado and wore like a half mask over his eyes and a black chauffeur gimmick. How do you look at Kazuchika Okada? Seriously. How do you see Kazuchika Okada? The guy is dripping charisma. The guy does not speak English, I think he speaks some English. Even with that limitation, let's say he doesn't speak any. The guy drips charisma. He's as talented or more talented than anybody's ever been in the wrestling ring. There are very few people now or ever that have been on Kazuchika Okada's level. I mean, we're talking like the top of the top. We're talking the Kenny Omegas, the Ric Flairs, and I know a lot of people are going to have a conniption that I put Kenny Omega and Ric Flair on the same list. The Randy Ortons of the world, the Shawn Michaels, all of your greatest wrestlers of all time, Kazuchika Okada is right there with them. How do you not see that? How do you not know what you have with the Rainmaker? And that's why he's number one. You had arguably a top 10 wrestler all time, and you blew it. TNA could have had ties to Kazuchika Okada and had him as part of their company, even if it was only on partial stints, for the last decade and a half. And they blew it. And that's why he's at number one, as the worst repackaging in the history of wrestling. With all that being said, again, please hit like and share. We're trying to get to 1,000 subscribers. We're about 130 away from that. I would definitely love to get there, and I would love your help getting there. Also, if you've watched this video this long and you're looking at this, if you've got this far, please type in the comments Rainmaker, just so I know that you've gotten to this far of the game. I really enjoy, and I thank everybody that's been putting the comments in, letting me know they're watching the full videos. I really appreciate that, because it really helps for a person like me or other YouTubers that ask you to do that. I know I've seen it in other people's videos. That's where I got it from. It really helps us to know, and it really feels good to know that even if it's just one person that watches all the way to the end, it feels good to know that somebody took the time to watch the video all the way to the end. And if that's you, and you comment down here, I really appreciate you. I really do. You're awesome. I don't consider you a viewer. I don't consider you anything more than a friend. And that's kind of what I want the comments to be. I want the comments to be an open discussion of what's discussed on the videos. So light them up. Put as many comments as you want. Put as little comments as you want. But let me know you're watching to the end. Put the Rainmaker, or put Rainmaker in the comments. With all that being said, my name is George Coles, and this has been another Heel Heat Top 10.